One of my favorite lines in the Christian scriptures is seek the welfare of the city. It's a familiar line here. It's probably been said a dozen times over the course of this conference. Seek the welfare of the city. What do we know about the city? Well, the city is a place of diversity. You walk literally a half mile on Devon Avenue in Chicago, on the west side of Rogers Park, and you will hear Christian services over the course of a weekend in literally a dozen languages, from Eritrean to Croatian. You can visit a gurdwara, several Hindu temples, a half dozen mosques, both Shia and Sunni. My own house of worship, the Ismaili Muslim Jamaat Khana, is right at the end of that street. The city is a place of diversity. So if we seek the welfare of the city, what are we seeking in a place of diversity? Well, the first thing to say is that diversity is not just egg rolls and samosas. Diversity, more often than not, in human history has become conflict, which is one of the reasons that for the vast majority of human history, societies have been constructed with people from a single identity, a single ethnicity, a single race, a single religion. To seek the diversity of the city, to seek the welfare of the city, means that you are able to cultivate peace and pluralism in the city. So, right now, as our cities are places of contention bordering on conflict, let me ask a question. If you're the mayor sitting on the 12th floor of City Hall, or you're a college president staring out at the quad at Columbia University, where faculty are not teaching together right now because the contention is so thick, the tension is so high, who can that person count on to cultivate peace and pluralism? In the city of Chicago, on the campus of Columbia University? Could it be you? Could that be the calling card of the Christian in a moment of contention? That you can be counted on to cultivate peace and pluralism in a situation of high conflict. That the president, the mayor, the chancellor can call you and say, I'm going to send in Michael Ware. The students are at each other's throats on the quad. Michael will know how to de-escalate. He's read Amanda Ripley's High Conflict. He's read Peter Coleman's The Way Out. He's read David Brooks's new book, How to Know a Person. He understands the science and the practice of pluralism. There is a way of doing this, a tone to set, a sequence of questions to be asked, a way of bringing out people's best selves. There's a century worth of scholarship on this. But of course, everybody in this room belongs to traditions that are way over a century old. And so why, in addition to commending to you that art and science and practice of pluralism, the literature that has come out more recently on how to do this well, and I think it is an extremely important literature. What I want to lift up in the remainder of my time here is the heartbeat of where we come from. It's religious traditions. It's what does it mean to have a theology of pluralism? To feel called by God to seek the welfare of the city in a way that cultivates peace and pluralism, not just because we know the science and the practice of it, but because we feel called by God to do it well. And I want to share with you a Muslim theology of pluralism. I have some windows into a Christian theology. I love lines like seek the welfare of the city. I love the Good Samaritan story, particularly the exegesis that names the fact that the Samaritan was not just some random other, but the religious other. And so it was particularly radical for Jesus to say, go and do likewise, following him. But what I want to share with you right now is a Muslim theology of pluralism. Partially because Too few people know it, and that is a travesty. There is a Muslim call to seek the peace and pluralism of the city. And secondly, because I have learned more about the Muslim call from listening to Christians and Jews and Hindus and Baha'is and Buddhists talk than anything else. Because when you tell your story of pluralism, you tell your story of a theology of interfaith cooperation, I feel moved, in fact, commanded to go seek my own story. So in my sharing of Islam's approach to peace and pluralism, perhaps it will call you in your own way to expand the knowledge of your own tradition's approach to this. I want to begin at the beginning of Islam when it comes to this, which is the year 610. Muhammad is on the mountain. He is doing what he does every Ramadan. He is praying. He is fasting. He is giving alms to the poor. Note, I do not call him prophet, because on this day, the 22nd day of Ramadan, he has not yet been visited. It is on the next night, the 23rd day, that he feels a force gripping him, saying, Ikra, recite. He doesn't know what is happening. He says, I am not a reciter. I am not a poet. I am not part of that tradition. Again, the force grips him. Ikra, recite. Again, Muhammad says, I am not a reciter. Third time, the force grips him. And this time, he feels the first verses of what becomes known as the Quran coming from his ribs. Recite in the name of he who created you from a clot of blood. Muhammad doesn't know what's happened to him. He's scared out of his mind. He goes to the person he loves and trusts most in the world. He cuddles into her lap and looks up at his wife, Khadija, and says, this has been my experience. What has happened to me? And Khadija says, I don't know exactly, but I know for sure that you are too righteous a man to have been possessed by a demon. Khadija takes her husband, Muhammad, to her cousin, a man known as Waraka, a man who is said to be learned in the scriptures. They explain the situation. Waraka looks in Muhammad's eyes, kisses him on the forehead, and says, verily, the prophet of your people has arrived. Who is Waraka? What does it mean to be learned in the scriptures in the early 7th century in the western half of the Arabian Peninsula? Waraka is a Christian monk. The first person to recognize the prophethood of Muhammad, the coming of a new religious civilization, is a Christian. Waraka never converts. Muhammad never asks him to. Deep in my religious tradition is the story of a person from one faith respecting so deeply, in a reverent way, in a way that is seminal, something new and beautiful is happening, and while I am not going to be a part of it in a central way, I am going to recognize its holiness and seek its flowering. The beginnings of an Islamic theology of cooperation and pluralism, of respect for difference, even when that is a difference of doctrine. A few years before that, Muhammad, the merchant, was in the city of Mecca, a diverse city. And there were a group of tribes squabbling over who would have the honor of placing the final stone in the Kaaba, the black stone, the stone that completes the structure that Abraham creates to honor the one God. They see Muhammad come through the city square, and they say, Al-Amin will show us the way. Al-Amin means the reliable. It was Muhammad's nickname in Mecca. That's how he was known. Muhammad surveys the situation, de-escalates the tension, brings out a blanket, and he says, place the stone in the center of the blanket. Each one of you hold on to a side of the blanket and collectively bring the stone close to the Kaaba, and I will be the one who pushes it in. Again, at the center of my tradition, a story that virtually every Muslim knows, is a story of the holiness of cooperation, the holiness of peacemaking. When you come across a group of diverse people who are in a conflict, do you have the ability to de-escalate and the creativity to resolve? Two stories from the beginnings of my tradition. In the year 622, the Prophet Muhammad moves from the city of Mecca to the city of Medina. The year is so important that that's when the Islamic calendar is dated back to. It's not dated back to the year of Muhammad's birth, 570. It's not dated back to the year of Revelation, 610. It's dated to 622, when he moves from one city, Mecca, to another, Medina. The city of Medina is a squabbling city. It is a city of diverse tribes and sects and religions. There are pagans, there are Christians, there are Jews, there's a fledgling Muslim community. There's people who are from a variety of smaller groups, and they are constantly at each other's throats. The Prophet Muhammad calls a meeting in the home of his friend Muhayrik. Muhayrik is a rabbi. In this meeting, the Prophet leads this group of diverse leaders of Medina into one of the earliest documents of pluralism, a document called the Constitution of Medina, where everybody's individual identity, tribe, sect, religion is affirmed. You get to be who you are, and we will come together in these various ways to build a city. That's when the city's name changes from Yathrib to Medina. Medina means city of the prophet. The occasion of the Constitution of Medina, written in the home of a rabbi by a group of elders from these squabbling tribes and religions, about how everybody's personal way is affirmed, but collectively we have to be something larger together. The Constitution of Medina is the first step towards peace and pluralism in that city. The second step is a shura, an assembly of people who would apply the principles of a constitution. Are you beginning to see why I see such great resonance between American identity and Muslim identity? The structures are so similar. A constitution, an assembly of people, a Senate effectively who would apply that constitution, and then the emergence of a civil society. Because the prophet knows that you cannot just have principles and groups of people applying principles on high. To seek the welfare of the city, to cultivate peace and pluralism, you need places where ordinary people gather all the time. And so the prophet builds a community center, a masjid. We mostly know of masjids as places of Muslim worship, and they are. But the prophet's masjid in Medina was far more than that. Open on all three sides. Anybody could come in. Men and women, cats and goats. This is all in the sources. And there's joy in these sources, saying all of these people gathered. When a group of people comes from Abyssinia and they do their dances in the city of Medina, the prophet asked them to do them in the masjid. When a group of Christians come from Najran and they are arguing theology with the prophet, the nature of Jesus, and comes time for their prayers, and they seek from the prophet an opportunity to leave the city, to offer their prayers outside of the city of the prophet, come back in and resume their discussions, the prophet says, no, pray in my masjid. It is a place of holiness, of gathering, of peace and pluralism for all of us. A city needs a community center. A city needs a place where people from a range of identities, from a divergence of ideologies, gather in concrete and cooperative activities. The fourth thing that the prophet does is he starts a common market. Before this, every sect and tribe in Medina had their own market. Goods and services were traded only within identity groups. It strengthened those identity groups, and it cultivated hostility between identity groups. The prophet looks at this and says, this is not a good situation. We need a place where people can trade goods and services amongst each other. Trade, offering value, purchasing value is one of the ways that communities come together. It's one of the ways you seek the welfare of the city. He builds a common market. Incidentally, right next to the masjid. So after Friday prayers, all of these people would come and they would buy and sell and trade together. The prophet quickly notices that not everybody is going to be successful in a market environment, however fair you try to make it. And so he begins a charity system, zakat. He says, for every family and individual that is able, you give 2.5% of your wealth, and it goes towards a collective pot to help people who need it. Well, one of the following Fridays, people stand up in the masjid, and they seek the aid of zakat. The first person who stands up is a man who says, I am poor. Can I have zakat? And the prophet looks at him and says, you are strong. Do you have tools? Go to the forest and chop down dead wood into firewood and sell it in the market. A second man stands up and says, I am poor and weak. Can I have zakat? And the prophet looks at him and says, you have friends and family. Have them help you start a business and sell food in the market. I want to pause for a moment here. This is a moment of very subtle but profound holiness. These people are standing up and saying, this is what I don't have. And what's the role of the prophet in this situation? It's not scold. It's not you're lazy, you're bad. The role of the prophet is to see what people do have. Perhaps there is something in the human psyche that instincts towards our own weakness. Perhaps if you have a community or a society which encourages people, they will actually do it even more often. The role of the leader is to see people's strengths. Again, not as a scold, as an empowerer, as a coach, as a visionary, as a headlight on a northbound train. I see what you can do, and I am going to call you into that. It is a role of holiness. I see you principally as a contributor. I've established a system of charity. I know full well there are people who may not be able to. But I am first going to see your strengths, because actually a huge part of the human psyche is to be able to do things, to be able to contribute, to help. Leaders help people help. That's why I love the image of a potluck when it comes to the metaphor for a nation. We're not a melting pot in America. We don't want to melt our identities into a common goo. I want to stand up here and tell you the Muslim story of interfaith cooperation. I want my friend Paul to stand up and tell you the distinctive Latter-day Saint story of pluralism and interfaith cooperation. I love it when my friend Michael Ware tells me his inspiration to cultivate peace and pluralism amongst diversity. We want people's distinctive identity. It's the same thing as wanting a diverse set of dishes at a potluck. You don't want everybody to just bring casserole or biryani or funeral potatoes. However much I like biryani, you don't want a potluck with just biryani. It's a heart attack in a night, I'll tell you that right now. You want a diversity of dishes, and you want a creative combination of those dishes, and you want enriching conversation around them. That is why diversity is holy. But that's why it needs us, the practitioners of peace and pluralism, who seek the welfare of the city, but know that we are called to do it by our faith, because that will last. We apply the science, but we rely on our faith to guide us, to motivate us, to inspire us through the very, very hard times. And right now is one of those hard times. Right now is one of those hard times. I want to end with this. I want to end with, for me, what the fundamental story is in Islam about seeking peace and pluralism. Why it is actually a central command in Islam. I know some version of this exists in Christianity. It's not for me to tell you what that is in your faith. It's for me to share with you what it is in my faith, to ask you to understand that that is holy for me, to ask you to look at it with reverence, and then to listen to you as you tell me your story of what guides and anchors and inspires you to seek peace and pluralism in the city. The creation story in Islam goes like this. It's in Surah 2 of the Holy Quran. God picks up a lump of clay and gives it his breath, and thereby creates Adam, the first human being, the first prophet. He says to Adam, "You are my abd and khalifa, my servant and representative on the planet. You are the steward of creation." It's a high position. It's a high position. God calls the angels forth and says, "I want you to honor this creation, this new creation, humankind, in the form of Adam. And I have made them my abd and khalifa. I've given them a task and a role and an honor that even the angels don't have." And the angels look at God and they say, "Why would we honor a creature that will only fiddle and destroy?" And God says, "I know what you do not know." Pause for a moment. How does God create us? In what role? To be his steward. That's our role. Doesn't give the task to the angels, he gives it to us. And what do the angels know about us? They know the truth, that we will fiddle and destroy, but they don't know the whole truth. And who vouches for us in the face of the angels' refusal to honor? God. God vouches for us. He doesn't say to the angels, "You're wrong." He says, "I know what you do not know." These human beings, they have other capacities in them. I have given them my breath. They have other capacities. And then God sets up a contest between the angels and Adam. He says to the angels, "I want you to tell me the names of creation." And the angels say, "God, we don't have that knowledge. The only knowledge we have is to sing the glories of your name." God turns to Adam, and Adam can do it. Adam tells God the names of creation, the forests and the rivers and the fields and the oceans. Adam knows them. And I remember my moment of coming to faith, my kind of sealing back into Islam, when I'm in my early 20s and I'm in my dormitory room at Oxford and I'm reading the Quran and I'm seeking, this is the faith of my childhood, but I haven't felt fully connected for a while. And I'm reading this surah, and the term that I just cannot get over is the term names. Names. Tell me the names of creation. Why? Because it's plural. It's not singular. God isn't saying, "Tell me the name of creation." Creation isn't one thing repeated over and over. It's not a monoculture. It's many things. It's diverse. And what's the gift that we have that the angels don't have? We have the ability to name diversity. We can flow with plurality. God makes creation diverse deliberately and gives us the gift to steward that diversity. That's what we're supposed to do. That's why God vouches for us in the face of the angels' refusal. It is what the angels did not know about us, but God did. Do we know it about ourselves? Can we remember that moment of creation when God gives us his breath and names us his Abd and Khalifa and says, you are my steward on a creation that I made intentionally diverse, that you could seek its welfare through the practice of peace and pluralism, guided and anchored by your faith, whatever that faith is amongst people of other faiths. Pluralism is not just a civic project. It is a sacred project, and we are engaged in it together. Alhamdulillah, thank you.
Eboo, I just want to ask you a question and really just like recognize this moment. It's quite special for me. I think I've told you this before. I gave my life to Jesus when I was 15 years old, the height of the Bush administration, and I became an evangelical with this calling to evangelize at a time of real political heat around religion. I know we can't relate in this time, but we had a Republican president that many Democrats didn't think was even qualified to be elected, and that president received the support of a bunch of evangelicals and was really closely associated with the religion. Again, we can't relate. And so there was a lot of heat, not just on politics, but on religion. And so here I was, a 15-year-old who had just given his life to Jesus, and then I realized, oh, this faith has all these sort of public implications and heat. And because I had such an amazing social life as a teenager, I was watching C-SPAN, and I saw you. And you were asked a question at a book event that you were doing, something along the lines of, aren't you offended as a Muslim when these evangelicals say that you need to know Jesus to have eternal life? And you said something along the lines of, I'd be offended if they did not tell me that, if that's what they really believe. And so for decades and decades, with integrity as a person, you are someone who has honored the dignity of people's own convictions, those who agree with you, those who do not, those who agree with you on a lot but differ on some issues. And I just want to thank you for that. What a gift it's been. I don't know if we'd be here. I don't think CCPL would exist without that confidence that you gave to a teenager that his faith is something that could be viable in public life, not just in the privacy of his own heart. So I want to thank you for that. The work that you do at Interfaith America is so incredible. You gave us such a gift of bringing ideas and concepts. I just want to give you an opportunity to give people a bit of a window into the work of Interfaith America. I talk with, for instance, Christian college students who say because they've participated in Interfaith America programs, convenings, they've met young people of different faiths than their own faith was strengthened. They had thought that maybe in light of exposure to people of other convictions, that maybe their faith would be challenged and weakened. Instead, they found that their faith was actually strengthened. And so just give folks a brief window before we go into the work of Interfaith America.
So first of all, Michael, congratulations on this. It's awesome. Yeah, you're working on this for a long time. It's very special, and I'm honored to be here. And the organization you're leading is a very important organization for any moment, but I think particularly for this moment, right? I treasure our friendship, and I respect you a great deal as a leader. And look, that story that you told, it's like I have been shaped by a set of evangelicals. Right, so my life was changed by the Open Door community in Atlanta, Georgia, which is an evangelical Christian community that serves the poor in solidarity. And I spent a week there, and I was just changed by Ed Loring and Murphy Davis. This is back in like 1995, right? And I think that it is a beautiful thing to be formed by people from your own faith and by people from other faiths, to admire what people in other faiths do. And then Ed and Murphy were like, you know, if we got a sense that you were going to be an evangelical, we would invite you. We're good at that, you know? But that's not like the sense that we get from you. So my strong suggestion to you is like seek your path in this, your religious path in this, right? So I'm like reading the Quran at Oxford in part because of that counsel. And I promise you, they are good at converting, right? They are good at, and part of being good at it is being like, now the conversation is different with this guy. Now we're in a great cooperation conversation and not a great commission conversation, right? So I wanted to just say like how deeply I've been formed by, you know, by people from a range of different faiths, and not in a superficial way, but in a very deep way. So Interfaith America, I lead this organization. We're doing it for 20 plus years. It's currently the largest organization that deals with the religious diversity, specifically in the United States. And you can really boil it down to three statements. Cooperation is better than division. Religious diversity is a treasure. Faith is a bridge. I'm going to say that again. Cooperation is better than division. Religious diversity is a treasure. And faith is a bridge. Okay? So what do we do as an organization? We're based in Chicago. We have 50-some staff. We work with probably a bunch of people in here. I'm seeing the Pauls here from the Wheatley Institute at BYU. We're proud to be in an emerging partnership with them. You know, Allison, who was previously at Aspen. We're you know, of course, you. Scott Buckhout is around here somewhere. Work with a bunch of you all in here. So what do we do as an organization? Number one, we tell the story of interfaith cooperation in America. There is a beautiful story of interfaith cooperation, and it ought to be told. And people should know about George Washington saying to Moses Sessions at the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island, this government will give to bigotry no sanction and persecution no assistance. You know, America is the world's first attempted religiously diverse democracy, the most religiously diverse nation in human history. People should know the story of how people from different faiths come together in positive ways. We tell that story. We tell it at churches. We tell it at a lot of college campuses. We tell it at stages like this. We have a whole kind of communications operation. The second thing we do is we work with a range of institutions to help them become models of interfaith cooperation. So we worked with 1,200 colleges over the course of our history. We worked with about half of those colleges together in the Obama administration. We work with YMCAs, Catholic Charities, Habitat for Humanity chapters. But can your institution be a model of religious pluralism? And as a church, you don't have to do it within your church, right? Can you do it in partnership with local synagogues, mosques, et cetera, right? So we work with a range of institutions. Can you be models of interfaith cooperation and pluralism? And third thing we do is we nurture leaders, right? Bridges don't fall from the sky or rise from the ground. People build them. And just like you have with your fellowship, right? We run a number of fellowship programs and a number of training programs where we are training people, first of all, to reflect on their own theology of interfaith cooperation, as I did here, and secondly, in the art and science of the practice of pluralism. So narrative, communications, institutions, leaders.
Eboo, I am so grateful for your work. Thank you for being with us. It was wonderful having you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you.